When you step into an operational technology (OT) environment for the first time, one of the most surprising realities is how many different systems need to cooperate just to keep a process stable and safe. Equipment from different vendors, installed in different years, often has to exchange data, share timing, and coordinate control decisions in ways that feel invisible until something breaks. That need for cooperation is what we mean by interoperability, and it is not a nice-to-have feature in OT because operations often depend on it to function. At the same time, every new connection, translation layer, or integration tool can introduce new exposure, which is what people mean by expanding the attack surface. Beginners sometimes assume the secure choice is to disconnect everything, but in real operations that can be impractical and sometimes unsafe, because visibility and coordinated control can be necessary. The better goal is compatibility without unnecessary complexity, meaning you allow what must work together while keeping the environment as simple and predictable as you can. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A useful way to understand interoperability is to think of it as the ability of systems to exchange information and coordinate behavior without constant human intervention. In a plant or utility, an operator display might need data from controllers, a historian might need data from multiple process areas, and an alarm system might need to reflect real-time conditions across the site. Even when the process is local, organizations often need to share operational data with business systems for reporting, planning, and compliance, which creates additional integration points. Interoperability can also include maintenance and support workflows, such as the ability to update systems safely or retrieve logs for troubleshooting. The reason interoperability matters is that people rely on these flows to make decisions, and decisions in OT are often time-sensitive and safety-relevant. If systems cannot communicate reliably, operators may be forced into manual workarounds that increase error risk, especially during abnormal conditions. Beginners should recognize that interoperability is not only about convenience. It can be an essential ingredient of safe operation, and that is why security decisions must respect it. Simplicity is the counterbalance that keeps interoperability from becoming uncontrolled sprawl, and simplicity in OT means designing the environment so it is understandable, predictable, and manageable over time. A simple environment is not necessarily an unsophisticated one, and it can include advanced capabilities, but those capabilities are arranged so that people can reason about them and maintain them. Beginners often misinterpret simplicity as fewer devices, when the deeper idea is fewer unnecessary pathways and fewer hidden dependencies. In security terms, simplicity reduces the number of places an attacker can hide, reduces configuration drift, and reduces the chance that a small mistake creates a large problem. In operational terms, simplicity reduces troubleshooting time and reduces the need for heroics when something fails. When an environment is overly complex, teams struggle to answer basic questions like which systems depend on which services, which accounts have access where, and which connections are truly required. Simplicity is therefore a resilience feature and a security feature because it supports confident action under pressure. Attack surface is the phrase that ties these ideas together, and it refers to all the ways an attacker could potentially interact with, enter, or influence a system. In OT, attack surface includes network ports and services, remote access pathways, integration gateways, management interfaces, and even operational workflows like file transfers and vendor support sessions. Every time you add an interoperability mechanism, such as a new data bridge or a protocol converter, you may add new software, new credentials, new network flows, and new maintenance requirements. Each of those additions can become a point of weakness if it is misconfigured, poorly monitored, or left unpatched. Beginners sometimes think of attack surface only as internet exposure, but many OT incidents begin inside the organization through phishing, credential compromise, or third-party access, and then spread along internal pathways. That is why internal attack surface matters as much as external attack surface. The goal is not to eliminate all surface, because that would eliminate useful function, but to shape it so that the surface is as small, controlled, and observable as possible. One of the most common ways attack surface expands is through well-intentioned integration that solves a short-term operational problem without a long-term architectural plan. For example, a team might add a quick connection so one system can read data from another, and then later add another quick connection, and over time the environment becomes a web of special cases that nobody fully understands. That web creates hidden dependencies, so a change in one place breaks something unexpected somewhere else. It also creates hidden trust, where one system becomes implicitly allowed to reach many other systems because the exceptions accumulated. From a security perspective, that accumulation is risky because attackers love environments where movement is easy and where defenders are unsure what normal looks like. From an operations perspective, the same accumulation creates fragility because troubleshooting becomes guesswork and changes become scary. Beginners should learn to recognize the difference between interoperability by design and interoperability by patchwork. Interoperability by design is documented, consistent, and constrained, while patchwork interoperability is improvised, inconsistent, and hard to audit. A key principle for maintaining compatibility without expanding exposure is to prefer standardized, well-understood communication patterns over one-off custom solutions whenever possible. In plain language, it is usually safer to have one consistent way of sharing operational data across boundaries than to have 5 different ad hoc methods that each require their own special exceptions. Consistency supports simplicity because it reduces variation, and it supports security because the same monitoring and control approach can be applied repeatedly. Beginners often assume that a custom shortcut is faster, and it might be in the moment, but it carries a long-term cost because every unique integration becomes its own tiny system that must be secured and maintained. Standardization also makes training easier because operators and support teams learn one pattern rather than many patterns. Importantly, standardization does not mean blindly using the newest technology. It means choosing approaches that are appropriate for the environment's stability and lifecycle. In OT, where systems may remain in place for many years, long-term supportability is part of security because abandoned or obscure integrations often become unpatched, unmanaged risk. Another practical idea is to create clear boundaries for where interoperability is allowed to happen, rather than allowing every system to integrate directly with every other system. If every system can talk to every other system, you get maximum compatibility, but also maximum lateral movement potential. A more thoughtful approach is to define specific mediation points, meaning specific systems or zones where data exchange is concentrated and controlled. That approach supports simplicity because it reduces the number of unique paths, and it supports security because you can apply stronger authentication, logging, and monitoring at the mediation points. Beginners should see that mediation is not about bureaucracy. It is about creating a place where you can enforce rules consistently and detect anomalies reliably. It also helps with troubleshooting because when something goes wrong, you can focus on a few well-known conduits rather than chasing connections across the entire environment. This is how you maintain interoperability while keeping the architecture legible. When the design is legible, people can operate it safely, and security teams can defend it effectively. Simplicity also shows up in the way identities and permissions are handled across interoperating systems, because complex identity arrangements often become silent attack surface. If multiple systems share a single set of credentials, or if accounts are reused broadly for convenience, then compromise of one credential can grant wide access across many integrations. When interoperability requires authentication, it is safer when credentials are scoped to specific functions and specific pathways, rather than being general-purpose keys. Beginners should understand that identity design is part of interoperability design because systems do not just exchange data, they exchange trust. If a data bridge has permission to read everything and write everywhere, it becomes a powerful pivot point. If that same bridge is constrained to only the minimum required access, the blast radius of compromise is reduced. This is the same least privilege mindset applied to interoperability. It also makes auditing clearer because you can tell which account should be used for which flow, and unexpected use becomes a high-signal anomaly. Simplicity here means fewer shared secrets, fewer mysterious accounts, and clearer mapping between functions and permissions. Interoperability can also expand attack surface by introducing translation layers that are difficult to monitor, especially when they convert between protocols or data formats. Translation layers can be necessary, particularly in mixed vendor or mixed generation environments, but they can become blind spots if they are treated as purely operational plumbing. A translation gateway that accepts many inputs and produces many outputs may be the most connected system in a segment, which makes it both operationally important and security sensitive. Beginners often focus on the endpoints, like controllers and operator stations, but the connectors are often where risk accumulates because they sit at boundaries. Maintaining simplicity means minimizing the number of translation layers, ensuring they are well documented, and keeping their allowed connections narrow and explicit. It also means ensuring you can observe their behavior, such as seeing what systems connect to them, what data flows they handle, and when changes are made. When translation layers are invisible, problems become harder to diagnose, and attackers have more room to operate quietly. Treating connectors as first-class assets is a key step toward compatibility without uncontrolled exposure. A particularly important beginner lesson is that interoperability must be evaluated not only for functional correctness, but also for failure behavior, because failures reveal whether the design is truly safe. If a data sharing pathway fails, what happens to the process and to the operator's ability to see and respond? If a mediation system is taken offline for maintenance, do critical functions degrade safely, or do they fail in confusing ways that could lead to bad decisions? If a security incident forces you to disable a remote access path, can operations continue through a safe alternative, or does everything grind to a halt? These questions connect interoperability to resilience. An environment can be highly interoperable, yet brittle if too many functions depend on one fragile integration point. Simplicity helps here because simpler designs are easier to make resilient through redundancy and clear degraded modes. Beginners should learn that a secure design is not just about preventing bad actions. It is also about ensuring that necessary actions remain possible when constraints tighten. Compatibility that collapses under stress is not really compatibility. It is an illusion that vanishes when you need it most. Another way to preserve simplicity while supporting interoperability is to be disciplined about introducing new dependencies, especially dependencies that are hard to patch, hard to monitor, or hard to explain to future teams. In OT, systems often outlive the people who installed them, so the environment must be understandable to someone who arrives years later. When you add an integration, you are also adding a maintenance responsibility, updates, configuration review, credential management, and troubleshooting. If the integration requires special knowledge that only one person has, it becomes a long-term risk. Beginners should recognize that technical debt is a security risk because neglected systems become the easiest targets. Maintaining simplicity, therefore, includes documentation, clear ownership, and routine review of whether integrations are still needed. Removing unused connections is a security improvement because it reduces attack surface, and it is an operational improvement because it reduces confusion. This is not about constantly changing the environment. It is about preventing the slow accumulation of complexity that quietly erodes both security and reliability. Observability plays a supporting role here as well, because interoperability without visibility becomes a guessing game. If systems are connected in complex ways, you need to be able to see those connections in action, such as which systems communicate, at what times, and with what patterns. When you can see the flows, you can distinguish normal operational exchange from suspicious movement. When you cannot see the flows, every problem becomes a debate, and debates are slow, especially during incidents. Simplicity makes observability easier because fewer pathways are easier to baseline and monitor. Interoperability can be made safer when it is concentrated through a limited set of well-monitored conduits, because those conduits become natural observation points. Beginners should understand that you do not need perfect visibility everywhere to improve safety. You need reliable visibility at boundaries and high-risk connectors. If you can observe who crosses a boundary and when, you can detect many forms of pivoting and misuse early. Trust you can prove depends on being able to point to evidence of normal operation and evidence of deviation. When you bring these ideas together, The practical skill is learning to ask design questions that protect compatibility while resisting sprawl. Does this integration create a new pathway that is broader than necessary, or can it be narrowed to the minimal required flow? Does it introduce a new always-on service that must be patched and monitored, or can it use an existing controlled conduit? Does it require shared credentials, or can it use scoped identities with clear auditing? Does it create a new dependency that could cause unsafe failure? And if so, what is the degraded mode? Does it make the environment harder to understand, or does it fit into a consistent architectural pattern that future teams can maintain? Beginners should notice that these are not tool-specific questions. They are principle-driven questions. They also naturally force collaboration between operations and security, because operations knows what must work together and security knows what must be constrained and observed. When both perspectives are used, you get designs that are both functional and defensible. Maintaining interoperability and simplicity is ultimately about respecting the reality that OT must keep working while still acknowledging that every connection is a potential pathway for harm. Interoperability enables safe operation by allowing systems to share the information and coordination needed to control physical processes. Simplicity protects that operation by keeping the environment understandable, predictable, and manageable over time. Compatibility without expanding attack surface comes from consistent patterns, controlled conduits, scoped identities, and disciplined management of connectors and dependencies. It also comes from being willing to say no to unnecessary integrations, even when they look convenient in the short term, because unnecessary connections are the easiest attack surface to remove. For new learners, the most important takeaway is that secure design is not anti-connection. It is pro-intentional connection. When every connection has a clear purpose, a clear boundary, and clear visibility, you can support the interoperability operations need while still limiting exposure. That is how you build an environment that works today, remains manageable tomorrow, and stays defensible when threats and failures test it.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.